The best way to predict the future is to create it. Well, our next guest is a groundbreaking technologist, serial entrepreneur, investor, and celebrated author, and has been creating the future for many decades. Alvin Wang Graylin is the Global VP of Corporate Development for HTC and has previously served as the China president at HTC. He has founded, built, and successfully exited from four startups in the mobile world and is usually found at the cutting edge of all things technology. He is the president of the VR Venture Capital Alliance, vice chair of the Industry of VR Alliance, and now the chairman of the Virtual World Society, following his words with real action. He was also recently inducted into the XR Hall of Fame. He is a distinguished professor at Beihang University and a recent author of the very well received book, Our Next Reality. We are so thrilled to have an esteemed technologist on the show today. Alvin, welcome to ACM ByteCast.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Rashmi. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise, likewise. So, Alvin, I'd love to start with a simple question that I ask all my guests. If you could please just, introduce yourself and talk about what you currently do, and maybe give us some insight into what drew you into this, the field of technology and computer science.
Sure. So, as you kind of just said, I'm doing quite a few different things, both in terms of industry as well as, or in corporate as well as more for cross-industry organizations. And my focus really right now is to see how we can make technology something that does good for humanity and for society, versus purely for profitability. And as you probably mentioned earlier, I've been involved in studying and developing product and services and building software for the better part of 3 decades. And you know, I guess what really got me started was when I first moved over from from China to the United States, and my father sat my brother and I down and said, "Hey, we brought you over from China so that you can come to America where you get the best education in the world and have an opportunity to go, make a difference." And essentially, he's saying the purpose of a human is really to leave the world better than when you came or before you came, and you need to find what it is that you can do to maximize that goodness. And I kind of gravitated towards software and technology and tech in general, just because when I first got here, one of the first things I did was with the money that my brother and I earned delivering papers and working side jobs, is that we bought ourselves a computer. And from that computer, we started to do programming and get online and go on BBSs. This was back in 1980, 81. So it was like Commodore 64. And then later on, we had a Amiga, and then later on, Atari 400. So, just really um, got gravitated to that, to the computing and tech space and online medium, because really allows an individual with no other tools except this computer to start creating things and to be able to see fairly immediately the impact of your work. And for a young person um, to have that level of access, I think I felt very fortunate to have been given that opportunity by moving to a country like the U.S.
It's amazing, Alvin, that you were able to enter the field. I mean, I think it's particularly impressive that you and your brother were earning money and sort of providing for your own interests. It's also amazing that your father had the vision to kind of sort of give you that that freedom of expression. And to tell you about, I think it's such a powerful thing for a lot of us to know, young or old, that we all have a gift that we can give, and leaving the world a better place than where we found it is so critical. um, did you always think that, as you were sort of, I'm guessing, very self-taught and learned a lot of computing on your own, did you always think that that's what you would study in college? Was that just sort of a natural progression?
Well, I was doing essentially tech pretty much since about 9 or 10 until college. And in fact, in college, I was building and selling computers and doing custom software and networks for small businesses and the university to pay for part of the college. So it was something that I was pretty good at and something I enjoyed. But to be honest, I was actually deciding between going into double E or going into aeronautics because I was in Seattle and Boeing's based here, so aeronautical engineering was also an area that I was considering. And the funny thing is when I was deciding between going to IBM for an internship to work on what became the PowerPC chip, or going to Boeing and working on the B-1 bomber, and talking to some of the folks at Boeing, and they said, "Oh, if you come here, you'll be in a room where there's no windows, and you'll never see the sunlight during the whole time you're here, and you can't tell anybody about anything that you've ever done, even after you leave." So after hearing that, I was like, I think I would rather work on something where I can actually see the sun and also be able to have conversations outside with my colleagues and friends, and be able to enjoy understanding things and discussing things. So I kind of moved over towards the double E side, and which also brought me later on to Intel, and then but at the same time, I was also working at the Human Interface Technology Lab at the University of Washington, which was the first VR focused research lab outside of the military, and headed by Tom Furness, who was actually just the former chairman of the Virtual World Society. So I just took over for him a couple months ago. So it's kind of going full circle to see the cycle of life, I guess.
That's incredible, right? I mean, such a long association. It sounds like Tom Furness was one of your mentors when you joined the Human Interface Technology Lab. I think that was at University of Washington, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Right,
Yeah, I mean,
right,
I think it's important for any young person to have mentors that care about you and really can give you useful and unbiased advice. And
right.
I think, yeah, so we should all try to seek those out, because just a few people in your life can really change the trajectory.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Including the one that told you about the windows. Also moved you in a different direction, even if it wasn't towards them. I also curious, Alvin, the field when you entered it, in general, VR was super nascent, right? When you started any serious work on it. That's amazing because you have sort of a green field for discovery, but I'm sure there's probably a lot of challenges also that you may have encountered because it's an area that nobody's sort of really explored seriously before. Can you talk about both? Like, what did you find exciting? What did you learn through that experience, as well as what were some challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going into any industry, and I've had the luck of being, at the beginning of multiple technology kind of revolutions over the last 4 decades. So, but the VR space, when I got in there, it was really the early days. And the devices we were working on were hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So they were definitely not consumer devices, and you had a lot of wires, and there was 2.5 kilograms on your head. So more than 5 pounds of these devices. Whereas today you can get them for a couple hundred grams, or some new the AI glasses or XR glasses can be under 100 grams. Right. So the weight, the comfort, the resolution, everything has just dramatically gotten better. And the best part is also, probably several hundred times cheaper than it used to be as well. So it's definitely a lot more accessible. And one of the other, I guess, challenges in addition to comfort is also just the software, because the processing wasn't there. You're more likely to be nauseous. So you have to kind of get your VR feet, they call it. So the more you use it, the more you get used to it. But I think that's kind of the on par for any new technology. You really, whenever you're getting into the early days, you have to deal with the deficiencies or immaturities of a new technology. I was also very early, in the internet space, where when I joined Intel was when the first browser came, and to see that entire industry come up. And when I went to China, I actually helped to create the consumer PC business there, and seeing people start having PCs at homes where uh, in China there was only business PCs that was 2 to 3 thousand US dollars when the average income of a per capita was something like $200 or $300 a year. So this is kind of 10x your yearly salary just to buy a computer. So I was able to help create the various things that fill in the various things I was missing in the industry in terms of lower cost devices, lower cost channels, as well as localized content to help fuel the growth in that business and the growth in that use case. And by the time I left, we went from zero to about 300 in chips being sold into the consumer PC space. So just 3 4 years later. And then later on, I was able to be part of the entire mobile revolution as well. Where when I went back the second time to China, I started the first mobile search engine in China. And at that time, there was no mobile internet, so we were using text messages to do conversational search. So kind of like what GPT search is today, we were doing back in 2005, so almost 20 years ago. We were allowing people to send a message, send a question, and have an response directly versus a link, because this was before they had WAP or apps or mobile internet or smartphones really. So to see that grow, and then to have seen the adoption of 3G and seeing apps coming into mobile phones, and then getting to that side of the business, and then over the last 9 years, seeing the growth of the XR business from essentially something that was disappeared for about 15 years to coming back onto the scene, and being able to restart something that I had been thinking about for multiple decades, to get back into that industry and play a role. I feel just very fortunate to have been in all these right places at the right time.
I mean, there's so many things in there that I want to talk about, Alvin. First thing being, you've had multiple stints, and from what I hear, going back and forth to China, how do you spot those opportunities? Was China a natural choice because that was home, because that's where you came from? So that's maybe my first question, and I have like follow up questions as we progress.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was lucky in the sense of when I went to Intel, the first time I went back to China was to help found the China office for Intel back in 1994, so exactly 30 years ago. Um, and the fact that I spoke Chinese and was from headquarters and had an interest, they made me that offer to go there. So in a way, it happened to me more than I chose it, right? But the fact that I was in that position, it also gave me ability to execute a lot higher level things than I would have normally at my age. I was 23, and managing a business of multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, and hiring dozens of people or more, or actually later on hundreds of people who I was managing and driving and setting direction for, all of whom were older than me or better educated than me, right? And the only reason was I was lucky enough to be a Chinese speaker who was coming from headquarters, who had that interest and was there at the right time. So sometimes things happen because of you're lucky in, but then if you can take advantage of those opportunities and really show your ability to execute, and your ability to analyze the situation and bring value, people will continue to trust you to do more and bigger things.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point that you bring up, which is, ability to execute. I mean, opportunities, of course. One is, to be able to spot that opportunity, to be able to make the most of it, right? The responsibilities that you're given. Of course, it's a super young age to be able to sort of have that, level of responsibility over a business. But it's amazing that you were able to, capitalize on that and learn and contribute positively. While you were in China, I know you mentioned that you were also a serial entrepreneur. I know you were in mobile search and advertising. again, I mean, it seems like a pattern. Again, brand new area. Mobile technology was probably just sort of burgeoning, in the world and in China at that time. What was your experience of building in sort of a brand new sort of technology area? Were there like learnings from your both your previous experiences as well as your education that you felt were like a continual thread that you could apply and build on these on this new sort of new world of mobile technology?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're all really a product of our prior experiences. Right? So, part of when I was actually at the University of Washington, I was studying natural language processing and working on neural networks and AI back then. And later on at MIT, I also did a lot of symbolic related AI. So that type of experience played a big role in terms of helping me come up with the right solution set to enable us to actually provide workable solutions given the limited processing that we had and the difficult complexity. In fact, with Chinese, it's actually a more complex language to work with because there are no spaces between words. So there's a lot of different ways that you could cut a word to mean different things. So creating the right context to create proper natural language is probably more difficult than it is in the States. And there's a lot more to work with. Um, so that experience was definitely from a technical perspective helpful. The other thing was really just experience of having done a startup after MIT in Boston and working through the difficulties of trying to sell to large companies, trying to get the big portals and e-commerce companies to work with us. When I went to China, I had to do the same thing, but to state-owned enterprises, to large carriers. So I was able to, after we built our solutions, sell to Chinese carriers and have them implement our search solution in their data centers and have our staff operating, within their premises to get these services up and running. And so that kind of prior experience definitely helped to feel and make me prepared to take that on. But again, when you're working in a brand new space, there's always new difficulties that you don't think of. It's really, I think, finding good partners and good teammates that will fill in for things that are missing on your side, because there's no way a single founder is able to have the total solution.
Absolutely. I mean, and I know I was listening to some of your older, interviews, and I know that you had a really, really sort of successful set of partnerships. I know you were a partner at the Olympics. You partnered with China
Yeah, no,
Telecom.
actually, the Olympics is something I'm actually quite proud of because at the time when the 2008 Olympics came around, everybody wanted to be a partner, and they were paying tens of millions of dollars to get your name on a logo and be able to use it. But for us to actually have done it completely organically, where we said we think we can help you make this service and make it multilingual, make it natural language, make it work on any phone, and they kind of didn't believe us. But I had my team work for 6 months dedicated to that project, and we won the bid and was able to be the official mobile search provider for the Beijing Olympics, which is a real proud moment for us, even though we didn't really get any money for it. But the sense of gratification of being able to serve your country and to serve a such an important entity as the Olympics was something that was worth it for us to put that effort into.
Absolutely. And just the experience of like working at that scale, at such a global sort of world stage, it is phenomenal. And obviously it stuck out. Like when I was listening, I was so impressed and I was like, wow, that's such an amazing achievement for a young, startup company. One question I had, Alvin, about the companies that you built, I know it seemed like you were building for the hyperlocal market, right? You were building for the Chinese market. Did you take these products into different international markets? And what was that experience like building in China, bringing it maybe west or wherever else that you took it?
Yeah, so for the services that I did in China, actually, they were pretty much for the Chinese market because there was very local language, local market. And the good thing is China is actually a large enough market where you can do that. Probably the only other place you can do that is in the US. These are essentially the two largest indigenous markets that you could operate in. And to be honest, I think Chinese companies, particularly software companies in general, have had a really tough time getting products to be accepted outside of China. So, I was in a period where really there was no Chinese apps or services or even websites that was popular outside of China. Now, over the last few years, we have things like TikTok and that came out of China, but really that may be one of the very few that was able to cross borders and be able to have that impact. Other things like the more appliances and digital equipment and so forth, those have been very popular out of China for a very long time. But in terms of the software side, I think that the cultural and language barriers and the customs and expectations and user experiences of different cultures has made it a little bit more difficult for China. But I don't think that that's going to be a issue longer term. Although now the bigger problem is probably more geopolitical barriers that are being put up to limit the success. I think recently they've just announced that they're going to have a ban of TikTok that will start in January 1st. Right. So, these are the kind of things that we would like not to see. I'm actually not a big fan of social networks that are, not bring more innate value. And I think, TikTok's probably one of the ones where you can spend a lot of time but not really learn much. So I'm not a big fan of it, but I think the fact that we are operating the way we are right now in the US, where you have this, essentially a ban of particularly good reason, considering that they've really followed all of the policies and expectations of the local law, right? So for America to be positioning itself as a democratic place of freedom and free speech, that's a little bit of hypocritical.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I think your point about TikTok is well taken by me. I know my teenagers will probably object or protest, but yeah, no, I hear you. What was also interesting, Alvin, is around this time when you were in China and you were building and working very deeply in this space of building these companies. You went back to HTC, or you kind of forayed into the VR space again. How did you see that emerging interest? I'm guessing they approached you because you had expertise in this area, but what do you think kind of, saw that resurgence?
Yeah, so it was kind of a coincidence in the sense of I had recently sold my company, and then I was helping a friend start up a venture capital firm in Taiwan. And at the same time, I then got contacted by a friend who was the special assistant for Jack Ma. So he's the chairman for Alibaba. And apparently, Jack Ma was talking to the chairman of HTC, and they had mentioned that they were looking for somebody to head up their VR business, and if you had any candidates. And my friend who was in the room, I guess, said, "Oh, I think I know somebody that might be a good fit." And somehow that connection got made, and I was able to go and speak with Sure. So, yeah, sometimes good things happen just by luck, and I think I've been the recipient of multiple lucky breaks over my career.
I mean, I think it's also like, I think an area that you were kind of one of the pioneers in. So certainly, I think it was, luck on both sides. I'm sure they were super lucky to have you as they were sort of, bringing up their, VR division. Uh, what did you think in terms of the market itself at that time, Alvin? Did you see it grow at the pace that you expected? Was it something that it was sort of more like a visionary thought from HTC saying, hey, I think this market's going to grow, let's start to invest in it? Because it was still pretty early when you went in there. I don't think it had taken over, the interest hadn't taken over the world as it has today.
Yeah, yeah. So it was fairly early, and it was a relatively early product because when I tested it, it was still the kind of the early prototypes, but it is already significantly better than what's been on the market for the last 10 years, in the sense of it was HTC was a company that had first room scale VR, where you can walk around the room and essentially experience a holodeck type experience. Whereas at the same time, when Oculus, who was the other player in the market that was later bought by Meta or Facebook, they had ones where you were essentially sitting down in front of a camera and you can move around, but it was essentially a sit down type experience. So I was actually quite impressed from what I saw with HTC, and that did heighten my interest. But at the same time, when I was speaking with Sher after the demo, she's like, "Oh, what do you think? Does this excite you?" And I was like, "Oh, this is really exciting, but it's actually not that different than what I saw, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, when I first experienced this thing." Because, when we had those several $100,000 devices, it already had the ability to do six stops, so 6 degrees of freedom, being able to move around. It had, hand tracking, it had full body tracking. So I've been able to experience it definitely at a much lower resolution and lower processing, lower fidelity. But it really was more of a kind of a linear type of a progress from where I was, and but it definitely showed me what was possible, right? And even with the early ones I saw in the early '90s, I could see where it was coming, and I had told myself, hey, within 10 years, everybody's going to be using this. This is going to be amazing. 3 decades later, I think we're getting close to some broader adoption, but we're probably still a few years away from having this becoming uh, fully mainstream. Um, but when I saw it again in 2015, I was thinking, okay, now I think this second resurgence is probably we're ready to take this more mainstream. I would have expected it by now to have gone even further than it is, even though it has gone into tens of millions of users now. But we're still far, far away from the billions of users that we see on cell phones, right? So we're still two orders of magnitude away from where we need to be.
That's very interesting, Alvin. What do you think is sort of holding us back? I mean, when you took on the role at HTC, what was your goal? In terms of like what metrics were you tracking to see the success of this program or the product?
Yeah. I mean, I was looking essentially at trying to match the growth that we saw with the iPhone, and you look at the iPhone, the first few years grew very slowly. I mean, not very, but let's say a few million units. But by the third, fourth, or fifth year, it started to really ramp up into the tens and then the hundreds of millions by the fourth year. And in some ways, I was kind of internally forecasting that okay, we should be able to get into that order of magnitude and at least into the tens of millions of units, and then probably within 5 years in the over 100 million units. So I think it definitely has not lived up to that expectation I had for myself. Although I think internally there was a mix of expectations because I don't think the devices and hardware were as ready for mainstream as I had thought it was, because it still had wires that connected. It still required high-end PCs to dock it the first few years. Only after the third year did we start working and releasing on these standalone devices. And now we're getting to a point where I think we are really now a few years away, like 3 to 5 years away from having the hundreds of millions of devices out there. Because I think we need to move from having headsets, which are giant boxes on your head, to glasses form factors. And within the next couple of years, you'll find that there will be probably over a dozen vendors from around the world that will be providing glasses type form factors that has displays, that has AI built in, has fairly long use time, compared to let's say the Google Glass that I had first used back probably more than 10 years ago. Um, those devices lasted 40 minutes and you was out of battery, and it was one eye, it was really thick, and you look like a super nerd, right? Now you have glasses that look like glasses that people can't even tell unless they really look closely that these things have cameras or mics, or they're different than what you would expect. And I think the social acceptability is definitely one of the things that held it back in the past. Now I think that the currently that what's holding it back is actually the lack of content that makes you want to use it every day. What we find is that for a lot of XR devices, the first month or two, it's being used very heavily, but after that, it's dramatically slows down because a lot of people run out of the content that really excites them. And so the good news is now with what's happening with generative AI and all of these AI tools that are coming out, where we're first going from prompt to pictures and then prompt to video, and now you have prompt to 3D worlds or prompt to 3D objects, and then you have AI avatars that are fully synchronized with voices that you can then generate to sound like anything. You can essentially put NPCs that are almost feeling they are alive into these virtual worlds and have it all be generated almost all the time and almost for free, right? So when you have that, we get around the limitation that we have in terms of content that resonates with you and asks you to come back. And we will have reasons to put it on every day. And the more you put on these devices, the more use cases you have, the more data you are generating that makes you want to stay longer because now it is more useful to you than ever before. So that's I, I I think that positive reinforcing loop is about to happen, and when it does, then we will start to see the ramps that I was hoping for and expecting 8 9 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, Alvin. I mean, I think what you're talking about is also, how do you sort of build that engagement? I know when the internet first came out, people were thinking a lot about engagement metrics and how do you keep people on your webpage and, sort of ply them with the right set of ads and the content to sort of, the time spent was a big metric that we would track. Do you feel like, we are at that inflection point now of greater adoption because we've now learn to understand the domains in which this is particularly valuable? Because I know you also spent some amount of time thinking about applying VR in the field of education. Was that sort of just one of the areas that you were exploring? I thought it was fascinating when I heard you talk about that. And I'm just wondering if you thought that the technology naturally kind of lends itself well in that domain, and now we're kind of expanding way beyond that so that it's applicable to so many different areas of our life.
Yeah, I think education is one of the I think most positive use cases of this technology, right? In addition to things, let's say like medical use case or collaboration, gaming is kind of what a lot of people know XR for today because where Meta is pushing with their kind of on your face gaming console type of a positioning for their product. Although I don't think that's necessarily the most productive or useful use case. And the reason I really lean towards education is because we as a species have evolved in a 3D space, and our brains adapt best and learn best when we actually are in a 3D environment, when we can not only see something, but we can feel it, we can walk around in it, we can let our whole body be involved in it so we can have full body learning. And that allows you to learn faster, to remember more, and to be able to recall it better. And I think that's the possibility where we can essentially let the next generation of learners have the ability to not just watch a movie about history, but to actually travel back into time. Not just be able to see a document about atoms, but to actually reach yourselves into the size of an atom and see how they interact with each other. Right, and that kind of visceral learning is something that you can't help but learn. You can't help but get excited about. So yeah, so education definitely is an area I look forward to more use cases, and it has been a tough area for businesses to be successful in because it's a highly regulated business or an industry. And I think there's a lot. The schools in general have been relatively slow moving in terms of their decision making and their adoption. We even see that today with AI language models, where a lot of schools and a lot of teachers are afraid of it, and they're afraid of students using it because they think of it as cheating. And I just feel like that's such a wasted opportunity because this technology is something that can allow kids to have access to essentially a personalized tutor that will be available 24/7 and be able to teach them, at the pace that they need to be learning at, and to be able to personalize the content to them. And it should not be seen as a threat to schools if schools' objectives was really to teach. It's only a threat to schools if schools' objective is to make money from teaching. So um, I think that there would, the education industry is really uh, needs to be disrupted a little bit, and probably will be disrupted quite a bit over the next few years. And I think for the better. And hopefully the progressive teachers who are part of that structure will enable it to happen, where you're bringing in the AI to support learning instead of keeping it out as a way to preserve jobs.
I think, I think it's amazing that you bring such a positive sort of spin to the use of AI as well, Alvin, because I think a lot of us also, you tend to read a lot of, media, etc. There's a lot of fear, like you say, about adoption and what does this mean for, the way humans have been operating for, for centuries. And I kind of naturally leads me towards your book, Our Next Reality. And you talk a lot about the metaverse and just your overall. I think your dialogue in the book is sort of really highlighting the positive outcomes of us being engaged, for us sort of embracing this technology with open arms. So I'm just wondering if you could maybe give us just a little bit of your perspective on why do you think we're at this pivotal point of adoption right now. What has changed? I know you spoke a little bit about the availability of content, but what is your sort of perspective on why we as progressive humans should really be sort of adopting or embracing this technology now?
So embracing AI technology or immersive technology,
And I
immersive
would say
media.
immersive, yeah, immersive technology and AI as well, I would say. And I'd love to hear your perspective on both, because I think that there's a little bit of, caution and worry on both fronts.
Yeah, and it's natural for people to fear change and to fear things that they don't understand fully. And the reality is that both AI and XR are technologies that is complicated to understand and to explain. And particularly, I think XR, in the sense of, if you haven't tried it, it's very difficult to use words to describe it to you. It is because it's such a visceral medium. And there hasn't been enough devices out there to let enough people try it firsthand. Now, I guess the importance of why XR is going to play a greater role in our future is that I really think that the AI and XR are actually going to be two sides of the same coin. And so these are two technologies that are both maturing at the same time, and they're both highly reliant on each other. So almost anything in XR and the metaverse would not be possible without AI, right? Everything from eye tracking to voice recognition, hand tracking to, rendering 3D objects, and scanning, a physical world, to talking NPCs. All of these would not be possible without AI. And the same is, a lot of people don't realize the next generation of AI would not be possible without XR, because for AI to really have to get to the next level, it has to have real world understanding. And right now, there aren't enough physical sensors for these AI to get data to understand the real world. So a lot of its training for 3D for the 3D world is actually done in virtual simulations. So it's kind of like a matrix for AI, where we put them into these virtual worlds, and this is how robots are now training each other. This is how autonomous cars are training how to avoid accidents and to handle different edge cases in the world. So we need that type of systems to be around. In fact, if you look at all the new teleoperated robots now, all the humanoid robots, they're all trained using teleop systems, where a human is wearing a headset, doing something, and the cameras and the sensors are able to capture what the human's doing, and that information then informs the robot how to do something and to be able to repeat it at a professional level. So that type of tool is mandatory for us to get to that next level of AI advancement. Now, the other thing that a lot of people maybe don't want to understand or maybe are afraid to see is there's going to be massive job displacements that will come from the maturity of AI. Starting first in the white collar world, and then later on, as these humanoid robots become more and more pervasive, even the blue collar service work will start to be displaced as well. And what will these people need to do to retrain themselves? I think XR will play a significant role in terms of being able to retrain the humans into new skill sets that allow them to be productive in society. The other thing is there's also going to be a lot of mental stress that will happen from job displacement because so many of us right now create our personal identity and link it to our jobs. Sometimes when you meet somebody, the first thing you say is, "Oh, I'm Rashmi and I work at so and so company," or I do so and so work, or what's my so and so title, right? So we're so identified with our jobs as who we are, and if sometime in the near future, a lot of people, some large portion, 10, 20, 30, 40% of the population is no longer working in these jobs that they used to be in. How will they have a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, or a sense of value to society? And that's where immersive technology can play a major role, particularly if we can actually establish that metaverse infrastructure where we can allow the global trade of service and labor and cognitive knowledge around the world. If we can allow for people to be able to do travel, virtual cultural learning, uh, virtual services, virtual childcare, whatever, right? Where you can create virtual worlds and then use that as a way to have an outlet for your energy, or virtual art, or virtual music, or you can provide a service, a virtual service to a physical person or company somewhere else in the world, through a 3D, cross border platform. Right? So that's why I'm a big advocate of us starting to think ahead before all of these displacements happen, to start building that infrastructure that we need to enable essentially a parallel tier of digital or virtual commerce to happen. And this also allows for easy and natural redistribution of wealth between the haves and have-nots in the world, and the rich and the developing countries in the world, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where you sit or who your parents were. You can provide a service that's valuable somewhere else, and somebody else is wanting to pay you and compensate you for that service. So this allows that global workforce to be much more accessible than it is even today.
I think you bring up so many good points, Alvin. I mean, one thing I think is not maybe spoken about as much is how these the immersive technologies and AI is actually going to be great to upskill. We hear a lot about potential job losses, but we don't really hear much about what we could do to upskill using these technologies, and how it would be so much easier to be able to seek knowledge, learn, and be able to acquire new skills. The other point that you also bring up about equalizing, which is I think is the next area that I was going to go into, is how do we ensure that this is actually something that is not only limited to certain geographies or certain economic stratas, but is really actually equitable across the globe, so that people have access to this technology, and the communities that need it most in terms of upskilling are able to access it. But the other thing I think is also critical is, while we are talking a lot about the fact that okay, hey, there's all of these amazing sort of uses of AI, but there's certainly some guardrails, or like you said, how do we ensure that people are thinking about how we can, encourage its adoption, but within these guardrails to allow for this to be a positive experience, for most of the world. Who do you think is looking at this from like more sort of like an Uber level, across the globe? Are there organizations? Are there policies that are being put in place?
Yeah, so I mean, there are definitely a number of industry organizations that are trying to create more standardizations across countries and across vendors. There are, some regulations from policymakers that are probably more domestic or national level. I've seen more international level AI regulation, but very little international level XR or metaverse related policy discussions, right? So I think a lot of people have been a lot of the ideas and thoughts around immersive tech was actually drowned out a little bit the last few years with the rapid rise of AI, and everybody's attention have now focused on AI. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that uh, the issues that AI will bring to the world in terms of the job loss, the lack of progress, maybe even the lack of understanding the alignment, the interpretability can be solved when we have a proper global metaverse system. So one of the things with AI that people are afraid of is, AI is going to go rogue, it's going to kill us all, and it's going to become evil and domineering and etc. And the reality is actually we could probably take these early AI models, put them into these virtual worlds, and see how do they behave when they live in a world of a billion virtual beings. Do they act aggressively, or are they more benign? Are they more compassionate? and and to run it for 1 million years or 1 billion years in virtual time, so that we don't have these issues where people say, oh well, it's just pretending that it's nice until you give it all the power, then it's going to become evil. And you hear a lot of fear out there about where technology could go, but I know a lot of ways I feel like we're anthropomorphizing it based on what we've seen humans doing, but there's really no evidence and no research that shows that more advanced AIs is going to be somehow more malicious than less advanced AI. In fact, I think that the bigger danger that we need to be thinking about is really more around the misuse by humans. Know that there is 100% certainty that there are bad actor humans in the world, and when they get access to special capabilities, they will misuse it. And we were talking about cybersecurity earlier and before this chat, and if you're dealing with hackers and ransomware makers and terrorists, they're going to be using this technology to their advantage, because it is a very um, it's a very what is that and asymmetric tool, in the sense of the person who has it, if you know this hole first, if you see a vulnerability before other people, you're able to take advantage. And that asymmetric capabilities allows a very small group of people to have a very large influence on the system, whether if you want to hack into a system, and or you want to hack into a big, or you want to turn off the power grid, etc. Right. So there's a lot of things that that same type of asymmetric nature will be possible in a AI centric world, when we have very advanced AIs available, especially as they become more and more easily accessible, as well as easily processed, right? Because now a lot of them are being optimized, so they don't necessarily need to run on giant data centers. At least with data centers, you can sort of monitor what's happening. But when you start able to run it at the edge, those kind of security possibilities kind of go away. So there's definitely a lot of potential downsides, and the potential and the greater need for the guardrails that we had talked about, because the big misuse is really where we need to spend more time focusing on.
Absolutely. What would your sort of advice be to young technologists, folks who are in computer science who want to get into this field? Like, what would be good areas of research or work that they should be focusing on to actually make a significant impact?
I think the pace of change that we're seeing, essentially, if you're not already an AI scientist, it's probably too late for you to start to get into that field and to make an impact, right? Because there are already hundreds of labs and probably hundreds of thousands of people who are working in this field trying to advance it. And at the pace of change that we're seeing, within the next 1 to 5 years, there's a very high probability that we will get to AGI, and then likely within months or years of that we will get to ASI. So I actually am less I guess I would be less focused in telling young people who are just starting out their career and or starting out their studies in computer science to say, okay, now you should go be an AI scientist or a researcher. I would say look at what the AI systems have today and find an area where you are passionate about, whether it's for healthcare or whether it's for education or whether it's for better food or helping the climate or whatever. I think there's a lot of the value will come more from the application of this technology than it will come from the development of this technology by the time that they start to enter the workforce. So, and honestly, I feel like a lot of the people who are in these industries today, they don't have enough technical basis to properly apply what's out there. So this may actually give young people a greater voice and a greater influence in whatever industry that they go into by applying what's coming out of labs into the real world. Because what we actually find right now, even with what we see, the advances and capabilities that we see in things like the GPT models or the Anthropic models, where their actual use case in the real world is still relatively limited. And it's something that will not be the case within 2 3 years, where almost every senior leader I'm talking to is trying to find ways to apply it. So if you can think about how you can apply it to solve real world problems, whether it is cognitive problems or data analysis problems or decision making problems or even robotic problems to solve physical issues, I think all of those would be amazing use cases. I would say try not to do as much of what you can in the weaponization side. I know there are people in defense industry that are very heavily focused and trying to apply this technology to creating better weapons and better ways to harm your opponents. But I think we need to be careful about what type of signals we are sending to these AIs and how we're training them, because the AI is a reflection of what you tell it to do. And if you're telling it to find the best way to kill somebody versus finding the best way to solve the climate problem or the food problem or the health problem, it will do its best to do those things. And I would rather we have more of its capabilities and energies and more of our creativity and innovation put into the positive use cases.
Very well said, Alvin. I think that's very encouraging, and also such a positive direction in which to sort of motivate the youngsters of the world to start thinking about the applications of this technology, to embrace it, to learn more about it, and apply it to their to the problems that they're most passionate about. Thank you so much for your thought provoking work and for taking the time to speak with us at ACM ByteCast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed our chat, and happy to chat again if you ever would like to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alvin.
The intersection of computer science and music has led to remarkable innovations in how we create, perform, and experience music and the arts. Advancements in real-time interactive systems, AI, and digital audio processing have opened up new possibilities for musicians and composers. At the forefront of this exciting field is our next guest, Dr. Roger Dannenberg, who has been pioneering groundbreaking technologies that bridge the gap between computer science and music for over 4 decades. Dr. Roger Dannenberg is a professor emeritus of computer science, art, and music at Carnegie Mellon University. He received his PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon in 1982 and has since made significant contributions to the field of computer music. Dr. Dannenberg is internationally renowned for his research in computer music, particularly in the areas of programming language design, real-time interactive systems, and AI in music. Throughout his career, he has developed innovative technologies that have revolutionized the music industry and is known for creating Audacity, the widely known and used audio editor. Surprisingly, in addition to his academic work, Dr. Dannenberg is an accomplished trumpet player and composer, having performed in prestigious venues around the world. Dr. Roger Dannenberg, welcome to ByteCast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Very, very excited to have you. You have such a wide range of interests and experiences, and you've been able to bridge this personal passion and love for music with a very accomplished academic career. Could you describe some key inflection points in your personal and professional journey that have inspired you to pursue a career in computing and specifically at your area, within your area of research at the intersection of computer science, arts, and music?
Sure. I think that one thing that might be good to understand is that I've always been really attracted to mathematics and science and engineering. It was when I was a kid, I liked to build things. My father had a workshop and taught me a lot about using tools, and so that's just kind of part of my nature. And I was also really attracted to music early on, and pursued music through trumpet playing and writing and arranging, and so I kind of grew up with both of these things as very separate directions. And one inflection point that comes to mind is in high school. I went to a music store that had an analog synthesizer on display, and these days that would be like nothing, or it'd be hard to imagine discovering synthesizers that late in life. But for me, these were very new things and really fascinating, and I just really took to it. I had a chance to just play around with this thing in the music store, and being able to turn knobs and parametrically adjust sounds was something just was really awakening, and it sort of tied all of everything that I knew about mathematics and functions and physics of sound to the musical ideas that I had in my head. And in some sense, looking back on that, I see that that was really an awakening, and there was no going back. So I did try to pursue computer science as a profession, a solid way to make a living, and do it and enjoy it, and at the same time practicing and developing as a musician, which I thought I would, through computer science, I would have the resources and the freedom to make the kind of music I wanted to make. And it wasn't really until after graduate school in computer science that I started really putting the two together and doing research in the computer music area. And I guess one other thing I would mention is that when after I finished my PhD, there were people around the computer science department at Carnegie Mellon that were very encouraging. I think Alan Newell and Herb Simon were among those. These are great names and great people in computer science, and their attitude was that computer science was so all-encompassing that the important thing was to do good research and not worry about anything else. And that attitude was really pervasive in the department. There were just all kinds of things going on, and so I felt, invited and welcome to really pursue my passion, and that was tremendously helpful.
That's amazing. I think going from having a personal passion and then seeing that as independent or somewhat exclusive of your academic pursuits, but finally getting to a point where you were able to combine these two pursuits. And so being in a position where not only is music something that you can pursue in your free time as an exercise of enjoyment, but rather it becomes the focal point of your career. And so I think that's certainly something that a lot of people will take great inspiration from. I think as you described it, you've had this long career, not just as an academic, but also as an accomplished trumpet player and composer. How do you think your musical background and performance in sort of different cultural spaces has influenced your approach to teaching and scholarship more broadly? Do you find that there are parallels between music and your academic work, or do you find that it's shaped your perspective as a researcher?
I would say the most important thing that music has done for me is given me a real basis for asking important questions and really forming research questions. So it's it's through the practice of music. Well, let me give just one example. One of the early things that I worked on was getting computers to listen to live performing musicians and play along with them. And that was sort of inspired by a talk that I heard where someone was building a sensor for a conductor's baton. And their idea was that if you could sense baton motions, then someone could actually conduct a computer uh, through, processing sensor data to figure out what the beat was and what the tempo was, and that would be a good way to sort of achieve expression through computer music. And it's a good idea, but actually, I think it was musically uninformed because as a trumpet player who had played in orchestras and in bands and worked with many different conductors, I knew that performers in the orchestra are not really following directly what comes from the baton. And if you try to synchronize visually with the baton, you're just not going to play in time. And so I started thinking about, well, how does that actually work? Where does time and tempo come from in an orchestra or a band? And it comes from listening to the musicians around you. That there's this kind of collective entrainment, is the technical term we use, that enables people to play together. And our sense of hearing is temporally much more precise than our vision. So it's really necessary to listen. And so that got me thinking about, okay, so maybe if you want to synchronize a computer to musicians, you should be listening to musicians. And I thought about how to do that, and that led to a computer accompaniment system and patents and a spin-off company. And I think that happened very early in my computer music career, and it's just an example of how being a musician and being concerned with real musical problems led to interesting solutions and interesting research questions.
Well, that's amazing. So the ability to ask the right questions, but also having the personal context and knowledge yourself, being a musician, to pursue the right areas of research and solutions. You touched on some of your early work. Looking back from score following in the 1980s to some of your more recent projects like the Compass System. From your point of view, how has the field of interactive computer music involved since you began your work in the 80s?
One of the big changes, and I would say probably the biggest change has been the speed of computing and hardware. It's hard to imagine in some ways how slow computers used to be. Uh, we're looking at machines that are a million times faster than just a few decades ago, and it's something that I thought about, decades ago. That wow, computers are growing in speed exponentially. So, what are the interesting problems going to be 10 or 20 years from now when we have so much more computational power? And it's amazing how difficult it is to think about a world in which you have a million times more compute power. Maybe some problems it's obvious what you would do with more power, but I think with music and audio it wasn't so clear. But one thing definitely that happened that changed is um, it when I started working in the field, it was only possible really to make sound with specialized hardware, and now it's just routine to build synthesizers and very sophisticated audio processing totally in software, and that's just opened up so many possibilities for interaction. Now everyone actually has a very sophisticated audio system in every browser in the form of web audio, which is just one example of how uh, software audio signal processing has become just ubiquitous.
Mhm. Very interesting, and I think to your point, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is one of the key implications present day that we've seen of the acceleration of computing technologies is also in the field of AI, and so I'm sure as we look specifically at AI, I think maybe if you asked a lot of folks in the field 15, 20 years ago, a lot of folks saw a lot of potential for AI to enhance productivity with more routine tasks and less of some of the interesting creative tasks that we're seeing AI sort of excelling in today. And so, what potential do you see for applications of some of the emerging AI capabilities that we have today in enhancing music composition and potentially live performances as well?
It's a great question. The potential is really huge, and I was just thinking that back when I worked on score following and computer accompaniment, I helped a company develop a product that came out initially for the Macintosh, and at the time it was billed as the first consumer AI application. So that was considered artificial intelligence, and certainly for the time it met it checked all the boxes. Um, I think AI has been part of music research and making music, along with so many other things, and we've seen an incredible acceleration of AI capabilities through deep learning, and I think we're just beginning to really understand what that can do for music and how to integrate that with music. So one of the things I'm um, interested in pursuing is using AI to build more interactive real-time systems. So far, most of the work has been towards less interactive systems, such, for example, uh, doing music search or prompting um, a audio generation system with text and getting an audio composition out without a lot of interaction or real time control. And I think that music making is very can be a very physical performative task, and connecting some of these AI tools to real-time gesture sensors and live performance is a really interesting direction to pursue, and I think we'll see more of that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And how do you generally think about how, as a community, we can think about balancing the role of AI or potentially AI assistance with human creativity in music, while addressing sort of the importance of preserving some of these things to musicians and composers, and the general ethical considerations with the role of AI in this space?
It's a very complicated situation. One thing I like to do is take a historical perspective and look at not just what's happening right now, but what's happened over the years and even over centuries. That musicians have always adopted new technologies, and I think it's true of the arts in general. Even oil painting in the early days involved a lot of chemistry and processes and uh, techniques that were being developed, partly, largely by artists themselves. And in the music world, you look at the piano; it's just a marvel of mechanical construction, huge pieces of cast iron to withstand the tension of all those strings, and intricate mechanisms in the keys. So huge amounts of engineering and technology to make a musical instrument just that could play loud and soft with a keyboard. And so, technology has always gone hand in hand with musical developments, and that followed into electronics and computers, and so it's not like AI is making fundamental changes in that sense. The other thing to think about is that while there is some threat to musicians from artificial intelligence, generative audio algorithms for composition and synthesis and processing, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have electronics and broadcast and transmission. And if you look at what the recording industry, a different technology, did to live performance and the lives of many practicing musicians, and I like to point out to people that when they talk about threats to musicians, that there aren't that many musicians left making a living at music, because they've already been put out of work by the recording and the broadcast industries, and that all of that technology. So things are going to change, and I think that change is inevitable. But I think that just like electronic musicians embraced the new electronics technology and created new artistic opportunities, we've got the same situation with new AI techniques. And so this will keep the arts alive and keep lots of interesting work out there for composers and creators. And uh, the downside of some of this is maybe it's going to be easier to make music, coming out of black boxes and not requiring so much human labor, which has advantages and disadvantages, but it's just going to take some adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good way to put it. Of course, historically, like the role of technology has always existed and has always been a key enabler for further sort of accelerating or improving the production of music, how we consume music. And so, while there are, of course, certainly downsides in this new day and age and sort of the advent of AI, there's we kind of have to embrace these technologies as an enabler. So I think that's well said. I would love to turn to some of your work around software design for computer music. Of course, as the co-creator of Audacity, as the developer of the Nyquist programming language, what are some key principles that have guided your approach to designing software for computer music?
Well, one thing I can say about Audacity, which by the way I should mention that was co-creation with Dominic Mazzoni, who did a huge amount of work in the early days and was really the leader in working with people to put Audacity out there, which led to it becoming uh, a huge open source project used by millions and millions of people. Um, when we started Audacity, our initial goal was just to do visualization of audio waveforms and spectra to help with research, because there weren't really great tools out there, and we thought it wouldn't be that hard to build something, which was really the case. And so I think one thing that would say is that the commercial stuff out there tended to be very task specific. The software was designed for specifically for audio editing tasks, and I think the designers were thinking more about taking a very narrow view of what users might want to do with something, rather than looking at editors and audio displays as a general capability that could be offered in a general form for any purpose. And that's what we set out to do with Audacity. The other thing is that the models for early audio editors were um, treated audio files as these monolithic things, as if maybe they were uh, pieces of tape, like from a tape recorder. And so if you wanted to, cut, copy, paste, the early editors would copy entire sound files, which at the time, well, I mean, they're still big. They're megabytes in size, and at that time, disk speeds were not so great, and copying a big multi-megabyte chunk of data took a lot of time, and so these editors tended to be very slow. And we were able to look at this as computer scientists with some knowledge of data structures, and really think about, well, where's the time going, and is that necessary? And do we have to store audio in one big monolithic file and keep it that way? Or can we break it up into chunks and reassemble chunks in ways that are quick, so that we can make editing go much faster? And so that was, early on, one of the reasons I think Audacity caught on is that it was so fast for doing simple editing operations compared to all of the commercial software. And it was just because we took maybe a computer science viewpoint to simple data structures. It's not even that sophisticated, but it was obviously a good idea. Um, and then I think similarly, the if you look at Nyquist, which is a uh, audio music composition language, uh, also used for sound synthesis, and it's actually embedded within Audacity now, and so you can write audio effects in a very high level language within Audacity if you know how. So Nyquist, the whole point of Nyquist was to kind of revisit some existing computer music languages from a language design and a computer science standpoint, where things could be very much more unified. Just thinking about time and signals, and building abstractions that could be put together in a very flexible way, and that led to a functional programming language. And um, interestingly, uh, by using these abstractions, the implementation could be very specialized to different sorts of data types, and it actually ended up running much faster than some earlier uh, designs that were more concrete. So normally we think that if you build a low level, very close to the metal programming language, it's going to go faster than some abstract functional programming system. But I think Nyquist is at least one exception where having those nice abstractions allows you to do a lot of optimization that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Hmm. Very interesting. So, one thing that at least stood out to me is, thinking about existing problems and identifying interesting or novel approaches from computer science or sort of core principles from computer science to solve those existing problems have been key to sort of unlocking new opportunities in these spaces. How much do you see open source development, I guess, particularly in the case of Audacity, influencing both the accessibility and the widespread availability of music production?
Well, I think it's been huge. There, Audacity has had something like 1 million downloads a month for well over a decade. So, you can do the math and, and figure out how many people are getting access to some high quality audio production tools that run on average, even low end hardware. And I talked to so many young people that say that Audacity was their first exposure. And I think back to my, days wandering into a music store in high school and discovering a analog synthesizer. And maybe the same thing is happening now to high school kids that download Audacity and record their guitar in their bedroom or whatever and start doing music production. It's really had a big impact there, and at the same time, Audacity has been used. Almost every professional music producer that I talk to uses Audacity for one thing or another, just because it's maybe quicker to set up for small tasks, even though they have access to very sophisticated systems in their studios. Uh, so, yeah, I think open source software, just because it's free, it encourages people to to try it out and enables people to get things done. And the other thing I would say, and I like this, comes from Dick Moore, who is a um, computer music guy, and at UCSD, and he, in talking about software and music software in particular, said that uh, the software that academics and researchers create and put out there as open source, may not always be the best uh, software or the
Mm,
most sophisticated for any given task. But one thing it does is uh, uh, it sets a bar over which, if you want to introduce some software into the market and sell it, you'd better do better
yeah.
than what's already out there for free. And so it's kind of establishes has a strong influence in product design and systems design and just overall quality and capabilities. That if you can't beat the stuff that researchers put out there for free, then you've got to try harder. And I think we've seen a lot of software kind of step up their game a little bit.
Oh, that is certainly a very true point. It has indeed set a bar. And I think from your point in terms of democratizing sort of music production, but also more generally, developing this new generation of folks who are just as inspired in music production and potentially the role of computers and computer science just as you were inspired by the analog synthesizer way back when, I think must be an inspiring and moving sort of driving force for you.
Right. Well, I hope so.
I think we touched on a couple of your contributions, and I sort of want to give space for you to highlight maybe one other project that you're most proud of. Of course, looking back on your career, we talked about a couple of things with software design, programming languages, piano tutor, I think Audacity as well. Is there maybe another project or achievement that you're most proud of? And would like to highlight?
Uh, sure. It's kind of hard to hard to pick something because which of your children is your favorite. But well, before I move on to another thing, I just want to mention one thing I'm very proud of. It hasn't been that long since I started collaborations with Jorge Sastre in writing an opera that's been translated into English, and it's had a few performances, and it's been a really great experience, and it's a huge project that I'm very proud of. But another thing, in the more technical direction, one thing that I've worked on recently is trying to understand music through studies of prediction and entropy, because it's key as a music composer and music listener that music uh, has at a very abstract level, it's all about repetition and anticipation. And we've tried to formalize some of that, as have many other people in computer science and music theory. Um, but our approach has been to use uh, especially hidden Markov models as predictors. So it's a form of sequence learning, and we've used the predictions to form estimates of how much repetition there is in music and where repetition occurs, and the repetition sort of is how music achieves structure in many cases, maybe most cases. And then once you can identify structure, you can start looking at the influence and interaction between structure and harmony and pitch and um, entropy or predictability. And so I think this work is by no means finished, but it's a direction, and what I really hope that it will lead to is a deeper understanding of music, which currently there's a lot of, especially with the all of the efforts to model music with artificial intelligence systems and deep learning. There's been a real focus on popular music because it's popular and it's what most people hear and listen to, and it's actually uh, tends to be a little more formulaic than a lot of other musical forms, and so I think it's easier to learn, and so what these systems are I think failing to accomplish is an understanding of what underlies all music. So not just popular music, but let's look at Beethoven, or let's look at Stravinsky, or let's look at bebop, and how do all these forms evolve, and how do they all call themselves music? What's going on that's common across all of this music, and I think a lot of it has to do with repetition and anticipation, and that's of course all tied to human perception, because if we don't perceive it, then it's not going to um, uh, it doesn't really matter so much. And so uh, anyway, I think that line of research has been really interesting, and we have a long way to go, but that's something I'd like to highlight.
very exciting, and certainly an exciting area of further development. Um, I would love to touch on some of your work, um, sort of in the academia space as a professor and as an instructor. Having advised, I'm sure a lot of students who've gone through the department and the field. What skills do you believe are essential for students, specifically in computer music, but also entering more generally this interdisciplinary field, especially in light of some of the emerging technologies and trends that we're seeing these days?
I think for my students, the most successful ones have been the ones that really know a lot about music and have been uh, educated musically and are really passionate about music. So I think that I run into a lot of other researchers and lots of students who are technical, and everyone loves music, and so it's common for people with a lot of technical skills and computer science interests to say, well, I could apply this to music, but they don't really know so much about music, and I think that makes it difficult and less successful. So um, there's a lot said about interdisciplinary studies and interdisciplinary teams, and where with the assumption or just observation that not everyone's an expert in everything, and maybe the way to make progress across disciplines is you have disciplinary specialists that talk to each other a lot, and you uh, get some kind of benefit from uh, getting experts together, and I think that's certainly true, and there are lots of good case studies and examples of that. But personally, I've always uh, worked more on personal projects or projects with me and a student, and not so much in these broader interdisciplinary team sorts of approaches. And I think it's just really valuable to have to be really solidly grounded in music or whatever it is that that you're interested in pursuing.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Um, And so I guess maybe as we sort of wrap up this conversation, I'd love to get some of your thoughts on future directions for the field of computer music. So from your point of view, as somebody who's worked in this field for a number of decades, where do you see the field heading in, say, maybe the next 5 to 10 years? Particularly as we think about some of the role with advancements in computing, some of the rapid progress that we're seeing with AI integration and interactive systems. So, where do you see some of the exciting areas of research?
Well, it seems to me that the that artificial intelligence has become in a sense the new computer science. Or so just as in the early days when computers were becoming available, people were looking around saying, oh, I can apply computing to this and I can apply computing to that. We're seeing that with artificial intelligence, that oh, now I can apply machine learning to this and to that. And it's just as computers and computer programming became pervasive, I think intelligent systems are going to be pervasive in almost everything that we do, including music. And so uh, I think for the future, the the big question out there is, how do we make intelligent systems more interactive and collaborative and working with humans? So, as I said earlier, I think real time performance is a great area to think about applying AI and machine learning, even though, and machine learning is traditionally been a batch oriented, take a whole bunch of data, try to distill it into some knowledge and build an inference engine. So that's kind of the paradigm that's developing, but I think that it has its shortcomings, and thinking about real time and interaction is going to open up a lot of new possibilities. So I think that's a future thing to work on, and otherwise just generally interaction and control. Like we have amazing systems that are capable of taking prompts and creating stuff from that. What we don't have are systems that after they create something, allowing artists to go in and modify them, perfect them, teach the system something it didn't know that would make everything better, or would push everything in a certain direction. And that, people do that in a very limited way with prompting. But I think we have a lot to learn about how to really control systems, especially for artistic purposes where the standards are so high.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very, very promising and exciting areas of work. And I guess maybe just to wrap up, of course, we have a lot of folks who tune into ByteCast who are excited about computing, who are potentially interested in sort of establishing a career in the computing space, and much like you, potentially in a interdisciplinary field of study. And I know you provided some interesting nuggets or perspectives on your work in computer music, and some of the models of students that you found to have great success. But more generally, what advice would you give to young professionals, young researchers, students who are interested in computing more broadly, and potentially interdisciplinary field of study?
Well, I think the best advice I can give, and it's advice that many others have given, so it's nothing new. But pursuing your passions is really important. That you will be tempted to um, uh, do what people tell you to do, or do what your parents tell you to do, or do whatever there is out there that's offering the most money and the most income. And ultimately, I think that the thing that people should prioritize is having fun and enjoying themselves and being proud of their work. And you can achieve that by following what you're passionate about, and at least not having regrets of leaving opportunities behind that you really wish you had pursued. And I think it's a difficult world to do that, and so it's difficult to give that advice to people because it doesn't guarantee that you'll be successful. But I think it's still a good thing to aspire to, and a way to provide some guidance and look for the right opportunities and make the right decisions.
I think that is a great piece of advice: to pursue your passions, to find things that provide you joy and fun, and allow you to um, live a sense of purpose. And I think, coming from you as somebody who's been able to live that advice and live that mission, I'm sure a lot of our listeners will take great inspiration in your journey, and not just your advice. So, Dr. Dannenberg, thank you so much for joining us on ByteCast, and we're very excited to see the future of the computer music field.
Oh, thank you.